The Roman Empire defeated Carthage, crushed the kingdoms of the Mediterranean, and pushed its legions from the Atlantic Ocean to the deserts of Arabia. Yet beyond the eastern frontier stood an empire that refused to fall. For nearly 7 centuries, Rome poured armies, treasure, and some of its greatest commanders into the struggle, only to discover that victory in the east was never permanent. Cities changed hands, emperors celebrated triumphs, and entire legions vanished into distant deserts, but the frontier always returned to where it had begun. The most astonishing part is that Rome's greatest rival was not a single empire. It was first the Parthians and later the Sasanians, 2 Persian powers that inherited the same strategic heartland and proved just as determined to resist. Together, they challenged Rome longer than any other enemy in its history. Their rivalry shaped emperors, destroyed dynasties, and altered the fate of the ancient world. But why could the empire that conquered so much never conquer Persia? Long before the first Roman legion marched into Mesopotamia, powerful kingdoms had already flourished across the Iranian plateau. The Parthian Empire emerged from eastern Iran and gradually expanded westward until it controlled the rich lands between the Euphrates River and Central Asia. Positioned along major trade routes connecting the Mediterranean with India and China, it grew wealthy through commerce as much as conquest. Unlike Rome, the Parthians ruled through a network of loyal noble families rather than an intensely centralized government, creating a state that often appeared fragile but repeatedly survived crises. To the west, Rome had transformed into the dominant Mediterranean superpower. Expansion had become part of its identity, bringing prestige, wealth, and political legitimacy to ambitious generals. Eventually, the borders of these 2 civilizations met along the Euphrates, creating one of history's most heavily contested frontiers. Neither empire could simply ignore the other. Control of Armenia, northern Mesopotamia, and the caravan routes between east and west promised immense strategic and economic advantages. The first great collision exposed a weakness Rome had never truly faced. In 53 BC, Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of Rome's richest and most powerful men, invaded Parthian territory, seeking military glory to match Julius Caesar and Pompey. Instead, he marched into one of antiquity's greatest disasters. Near Carrhae, Roman discipline met an entirely different style of warfare. The Parthian army relied on speed rather than heavy infantry. Mounted archers surrounded the legions, unleashing endless volleys of arrows while remaining beyond the reach of Roman swords. Whenever the Romans attempted to advance, the horsemen simply rode away, only to return moments later. Behind them waited heavily armored cataphracts, cavalry whose riders and horses were almost completely covered in metal armor, ready to shatter exhausted formations with devastating charges. Few Roman commanders had ever encountered such tactics. The legions were designed to defeat enemies through close combat, but the Parthians refused to fight on Roman terms. Hour after hour, arrows rained down while supplies of ammunition seemed impossibly endless. By the time Crassus attempted negotiations, his army had already been broken. He was killed during the failed meeting, and thousands of Roman soldiers were captured. Carrhae became a humiliation that haunted Rome for generations. Yet the defeat did not end Roman ambitions. If anything, it made Persia even more irresistible. Successive emperors launched new eastern campaigns, each convinced they would accomplish what Crassus could not. Some achieved impressive victories, others barely escaped with their lives, but every triumph concealed the same problem. Winning battles was far easier than holding territory hundreds of miles beyond secure supply lines. The real challenge was geography. Mesopotamia offered open plains where Persian cavalry could maneuver freely, while the immense distances strained Roman logistics. Rivers flooded, deserts exhausted soldiers, and every advance pushed the legions farther from their strongest fortifications. even after capturing major cities such as Ctesiphon, the Persian capital, Roman armies often found themselves unable to remain. Without permanent control of the countryside, spectacular victories quickly faded into strategic withdrawals. Then everything changed again. In the 3rd century, the Parthian Empire collapsed under internal pressures, replaced by the far more centralized Sasanian Empire. The new rulers were far more ambitious than their predecessors. They promoted a stronger royal authority, reorganized the military, and openly declared themselves heirs to the ancient Persian kings. Their goal was no longer simply resisting Rome. They intended to challenge Roman dominance across the Near East. The Sasanians immediately proved more aggressive. Under Shapur I, Persian armies launched deep invasions into Roman territory, capturing major cities and defeating imperial forces in battle. In one of the most shocking moments of Roman history, Emperor Valerian personally led an army against Persia. Instead of returning in triumph, he became the first Roman emperor ever captured alive by a foreign enemy. Ancient writers describe the event with a mixture of disbelief and outrage. Whether every dramatic detail reported by later historians is accurate remains debated. But there is no doubt that Valerian spent the rest of his life in Persian captivity. For Rome, the psychological impact was enormous. An emperor represented the power of the empire itself. His capture demonstrated that Persia could do what almost no enemy had ever achieved. Still, Rome refused to surrender its eastern ambitions. Emperors rebuilt armies, strengthened frontier fortresses, and invested heavily in defensive networks stretching from Syria to the upper Euphrates. Massive stone walls, watchtowers, roads, and fortified cities allowed Roman forces to respond quickly to invasions while protecting vital provinces. Increasingly, the struggle became one of endurance rather than conquest. Yet military strength alone never determined the outcome. Diplomacy became just as important as battle. Armenia frequently served as a buffer kingdom, with both empires competing to place friendly rulers on its throne. A single royal succession could trigger years of warfare, while carefully negotiated treaties sometimes preserved uneasy peace for decades. Behind the grand campaigns lay a constant contest of alliances, marriage politics, trade agreements, and intelligence gathering. The rivalry also accelerated military innovation. Roman armies gradually adapted to Eastern warfare by expanding their own cavalry forces and incorporating heavily armored horsemen inspired by Persian tactics. Meanwhile, Persian commanders continued refining their combination of mobile archers and devastating shock cavalry. Each side learned from the other, creating armies far different from those that had first met at Carrhae centuries earlier. Few people realize that despite their constant wars, Rome and Persia remained economically connected. Merchants crossed frontiers carrying silk, spices, precious stones, glassware, and luxury goods. Diplomatic envoys exchanged gifts, prisoners were sometimes returned through negotiation, and ideas traveled alongside commerce. Even bitter enemies could not completely separate themselves from one another. Archaeology has revealed just how sophisticated this frontier became. Excavations across modern Iraq, Syria, and eastern Turkey have uncovered Roman forts, Persian fortifications, weapons, inscriptions, and supply centers that illustrate an enormous military landscape. Rather than a simple border, it was a vast zone where armies, merchants, diplomats, and local communities constantly interacted. Popular culture often portrays Roman legionaries as unquestionably superior soldiers, but history tells a more balanced story. Roman infantry excelled in disciplined close combat and engineering, while Persian cavalry dominated open terrain with mobility and precision. Neither system was universally better. Each reflected the geography, economy, and strategic needs of its own civilization. Their rivalry endured precisely because both military traditions were exceptionally effective under the right conditions. Perhaps the greatest misconception is that Rome failed because its armies were weak. In reality, Roman forces repeatedly defeated Persian armies and even captured their capitals. The problem was never winning battles. The problem was transforming battlefield victories into permanent political control over a resilient empire that possessed its own wealth, manpower, and centuries of statecraft. Eventually, a final series of exhausting wars left both powers dangerously weakened. When new armies emerged from Arabia in the 7th century, neither Rome nor the Sasanian Empire possessed the strength they once commanded. Centuries of rivalry had consumed unimaginable resources, leaving both civilizations vulnerable to a transformation neither had anticipated. Rome's greatest enemy was never simply an opposing army. It was an empire capable of matching Roman determination generation after generation. The Parthians and Sasanians proved that even the world's most powerful empire had limits, and that conquest alone could not overcome geography, resilience, and an equally determined rival. Their struggle remains one of history's greatest contests, not because either side achieved complete victory, but because for nearly 700 years, neither could truly defeat the other.